Don't go to uni. Oh, fuck. I'd like to make something very clear right now, okay? I'm not very good with a schedule, never have, never will. And it's probably why I've lost all the jobs I've had. I mean, I was a late baby, so if I can't come out of my mum right... Okay, that's the worst thing you've ever said. But now I'm here with a brand new video for you, and it's probably going to be described in the same way people describe my penis. Surprisingly long for someone as ugly as me. Speaking of weird things about me, it's come to my attention that the themes of destruction and violence have become very prominent in my recent videos. But yeah, we have things like Just Cause, and then Burnout. I mean, what's the opposite of subtle? It's been, pretty fucking obvious. You have them, and then you have that music video from a couple of weeks ago. That was just... sad. Now, I know that condoning violent video games has become a larger problem recently, and I know that me involving myself in that will be a pretty silly and inappropriate thing to do. So let's keep doing it. The gaming developers Volition, known most notably for their Saints Row series of games, have been a powerhouse of gaming for over 25 years. Ever since its founding in June 1993, the company has shot into the big leagues with its many successful series of games, starting all the way back with Descent from 1995 all the way to Saints Row, with its most recent release in 2015. However, a major contender within this company has, in my eyes, dropped off the gaming radar, that being the Red Faction series. Now, you're probably all wondering why I'm even talking about this series. Well, as it turns out, completely by accident, the release of Red Faction Guerrilla was 10 years ago. Last week. Look, I've never been good with things like timings, no matter how long it is. That means two things. I've had enough people recently complain saying, oh, you were 2 hours late for work, and me saying to myself, oh, this script should have been done weeks ago. Especially that girl that said, oh, you only lasted 73 seconds. I mean, that one hurt the most, because I thought I was a lot better than that. It's odd, since I fell in love with Red Faction Guerrilla the moment, if not the second I found out about it, and yet, from what I can tell, it's lost quite a lot of traction since its release, and frankly, a lot of people don't know why. And that's why I'm here, Nitalics, delivering depressing jokes and existential nightmares since 2016. Furthermore, Red Faction Guerrilla, as well as some of the other members of the series, we'll get to them eventually, brought in a new wave of destruction physics, something that had never been observed on such a scale, and it was all thanks to their unique engine, the geo-mod engine. The first releases in the series introduced the engine in a few first-person shooters, and that's apparently what this series was at first. I never saw the point of this. Like, people don't care about destruction physics mainly in an FPS. Most of them just care about getting those high scores and gloating and racism. Regardless, the true power of this engine was presented within Red Faction Guerrilla, and that's what I intend to portray within this video. The evolution of this series and the changes it went through is one that is rarely explored, and I feel that it's my job to show what could have been and what was in Red Faction. But for now, let's go right back to the beginning. Back to 2016 Nitalics. Wait, what? Parker! Legit Parker! There are no tigers in this game though. So, as you can see, stupid 16-year-old little bitch me, A, thought he was clearly really funny. So funny, in fact, that he thought he could just record a game in himself and somehow everything would just magically work out. We've all been there, Nicholas. And B, I've actually done something on Red Faction already. When I watched that video back, I first thought to myself, hey, I've got all the footage, this will make this video a lot easier. But no, all it did was scare me. We'll actually get into the in-depth look of Guerrilla in a little bit, but for now, I want you to cast your mind back a decade or so, before Brexit, before Minecraft, before being born. Okay, stop. You should be around the year 2001. I hope. Now, 2001 wasn't only the year when my younger brother was born, making it one of the worst years ever. Bad 2001. It was also a major year for the evolution of the FPS genre, with releases like Halo and Return to Castle Wolfenstein, just to name a few, and a Men in Black game. For some reason. Competition within the genre was rife, and yet here came a tiny brand new IP called Red Faction, prepared to stretch its legs and present what it had to offer, and frankly, there was plenty to show. You follow the character of Parker, a miner in the year 2075, who has moved away from Earth for an easier and better life to live. However, what he finds is an overpowering company named the Altor Corporation, who mistreats and abuses their workers. They are forced to live in unfit conditions without any say in their own treatment, and not only that, an unknown disease called the Plague? Really? At this rate, they may as well have called Red Faction Mars and Guns, the game. Is found within the colony of workers, and Altor refuses to help or prevent it spreading. I'll be honest, Altor seems like a bit of a dick. Also, did I mention this game was on Mars? I know it's kind of obvious with a name like Red Faction, but, you know, now I've confirmed it for you, so... yay. So basically, you get involved in a workers' revolution and kill all the members of Altor as you go through, and that's about it plot-wise. There are other characters, but they're fairly unimportant. It's mostly about Parker, but a focus on his character doesn't exactly make the story any more interesting.
Mars. I always thought of it as a romantic place, a planet of mystery and adventure.
From what I can tell, it's got major links to that Total Recall film starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like, they're aggressively similar. The whole rebellion idea is fair enough, but the originality within the story is, well, non-existent. But it's not a game you go to for the story, no. It's one you go to for the destruction, gameplay, and most of all, guns. Bang, 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 bang. This would be a lot easier in America. The shooting in Red Faction is surprisingly both intuitive and enjoyable simultaneously. The guns are varied, with shotguns and machine guns being a personal favourite of mine. They just feel so fucking good. And for 2001, the detail and design of them aren't actually that bad. However, the fun part comes with what happens when you shoot said guns at things that aren't people, which is where the geo-mod engine was first introduced. With the full name of the engine being Geometry Modification, it seems only suitable that the entire game would revolve around this landscape destruction, and sure enough, that's what it did. In essence, geo-mod basically allowed for the player to massively alter the terrain and structures around them with guns, explosive, and all matter of ways. This unique selling point is what made Red Faction stand out in the rush of early 2000s FPSs, and the whole video game industry as a whole. No other game of any genre besides some racing games had ever really experimented with destruction physics, and only really allowed scripted moments of action and destruction. However, Red Faction turned this whole idea on its head and went, let's make everything go boom. Red Faction was the first video game to allow this sort of level-altering, unscripted destruction, and that's why people love it. It's a psychopath's dream, which is probably why one-year-old me found it so entertaining when it came out. I was a horrible child. There were parts of the story that allowed for insane levels of destruction, such as the part where you blow up a bridge and cause one of the numerous APCs to fall through the hole in the bridge, or blowing through walls to pass locked doors. Like, that stuff is what the geo-mod engine was made for. But it never really reached its full capacity. The game was a shooter first and foremost, with the destructive element on the side, when in reality they should complement each other throughout. I get that back in 2001, if everything was destructible in the game, the PCs and consoles would just implode and just start reacting like this. But even just a little bit more freedom in the game would have increased the game and improved it tenfold. Or maybe not 10, more like 6. Red Faction even had vehicles such as hover cars and rovers, which all handled pretty well and helped with the destruction thanks to the use of missiles and miniguns. However, they were very few and far between. There's clearly a lot in this game and it evidently showed a lot of promise. However, it is let down by the overarching story, which we've already seen isn't all that special. And how can I forget the offline multiplayer, a staple of early 2000s games? Split screen. I remember those days when I was still learning about games. I was so naive and such a dick. The PlayStation 2 used offline split screen for modes like death matches with AI, as well as up to 4 human players, while the PC version allowed for competitive online multiplayer, featuring deathmatch, team deathmatch, and capture the flag gameplay for up to 32 human players on 25 different levels. Red Faction offered a lot to both new and regular FPS players, but was let down by a few odd patches and variables. Overall, I think Red Faction was a great step in the FPS genre. There was fun and engaging combat and a great destruction engine alongside it, but that's the exact problem. It's alongside it. There's no focus to it. It's a bit like most stealth sections in games nowadays, just there so they can say it's there, which ironically this game also fucking had. It has stealth and exploding walls. Why? With a plot that's all over the place, fairly unpolished and horribly inconsistent, Red Faction became a game that redefined gameplay in the FPS, but did nothing to present its effectiveness in storytelling. Regardless though, it's certainly a memorable shooter for its time, and was a positive start for the series. So did Red Faction 2 improve on this and make an even better game? No, well, kind of. I don't fucking know, I'll just show you what I mean. Red Faction 2 was released about a year and a half later in late 2002 for the PS2. Blimey, that was a lot of 2s. And in 2003 for the GameCube and Xbox. Yet within that time, Volition seemed to change very little from the original. Some of the game is actually downgraded from the previous installment. Set 5 years after the first game, Red Faction 2 follows the character of Alias, an explosive expert who has been tasked to return some information regarding nanotechnology that was stolen by the new threat, the EDF, or Earth Defense Force. They intend to rebuild Ultor from the previous game and put a focus on creating the ultimate super soldiers. It's funny because in the space of those 5 years, the nanotech was stolen 9 times over the course of it. Doesn't sound very secure, does it? It'd be like me holding up my credit card and going, hey guys, please don't steal this. I don't want you to do it. Do you want the PIN number? I've written it down for you. So the plot is basically about you retrieving this tech again from a military state known as the Commonwealth, which no matter how hard I try, does not link to the British Empire, although it would be pretty funny if it did. Eventually, this protagonist and his assailants join the Red Faction and rise up against the powers. The plot once again shows nothing special and was over surprisingly quickly, taking only like 3 hours to complete, which doesn't help the fact that the whole game just seems a bit rushed overall. Cutscenes just look off and the graphics, Holy shit. I get that visuals weren't a huge thing for the Red Faction series, and even at the time, they still look not too bad for the original, but Red Faction 2's graphics look like my brother's shit after he realised he was lactose intolerant. My brother isn't here. Oh shit! Normally this can be slightly overlooked if the gameplay is satisfactory, a bit like what I thought of Just Cause 4 and its graphical issues. But in this case, Red Faction 2 in some cases just looks even worse than its predecessor, to quite a staggering degree. Some of the character designs just look lazily made and downgraded, there's some distracting and inconsistent texture work and generally bland level layouts, some of which have no details at all, just a boring corridor. Yeah, like that. But even that has fucking doors. Did someone say door? Graphics-wise, it's not showing anything off. In fact, normally it did quite the opposite. But surely they can't fuck up the gameplay that was already pretty decent. Right? Oh, you optimistic little bastards. Of course they did! While there are about a dozen different gun types and dual wielding them is always entertaining, the guns feel a lot less effective in Red Faction 2 and just seem weaker compared to the previous version, both in how they work and how they sound. Yes, you have your pistols and shotguns and snipers and machine guns, and they're all fun to dick about with, but they just lack any sense of power or damage. Some of them have several modes and can be used in other ways, but it adds basically nothing to the weapons that already feel weak and lack a sense of true destruction. And to fuck up the shooting in a shooting game is actually quite impressive. It's like someone complaining at me for being unattractive. Alright, I know I am. I was born this way, fuck off. The geo-mod engine returns to show off its destructive power, and yet again, Red Faction 2 fails to present its true potential in the FPS. The first game, like I showed, had some great moments of destruction, and while they were infrequent, were memorable when playing. This game, on the other hand, has nearly half the number of moments where the engine is really shown. You never really feel like you're interacting and demolishing the world around you, and to create an engine for destruction and fail to utilise it properly seems like quite a waste. Most of the moments in the game seem really scripted anyway, and it just lowers the amount of potential destruction you can have. And it sucks. There are some positives to the game. Some of the scripted moments are genuinely thrilling, with vehicles playing a major role in that. The times when you're shooting from a helicopter, tank, or even mech suit are some of the most memorable and cathartic elements of the game. And unlike the first installment, some of the writing and the plot is actually quite engaging and well written. Even some moments out of vehicles are entertaining, with some of the office shootouts coming to mind as very fun to play, and an area that actually shows off the engine it's working with. Red Faction 2 also improved on the multiplayer, allowing for more death matches and different modes in loads of several maps that actually improve on showing the destruction. It's actually one, if not the most fun part of the game, because it actually shows off the geo-mod engine very well. I'll be honest, Red Faction 2 never really sold me, not like the original did. Everything about it is just a half-hearted version of its predecessor. Volition had a great start with the first game and had loads of elements to improve on for the sequel, but what was released didn't really amount to anything of substance or satisfaction. So, as a result, Red Faction took a turn in a completely new direction in 2009, one that would change it into something worth looking into, and one that would truly show off the potential of the geo-mod engine. But before that, there's one thing that needs to be addressed. I got a haircut. No. Well, I did, but that's not what we're talking about today. You all know that I've had one. I hope. There was an intended spin-off of the game called Red Faction Beast, but no one has any idea what happened to it or if it was in development because THQ shut it down before it could be in the prototype stage. The group known as Locomotive Games were the one behind it, and it was meant to be for the Wii, but it just stopped. Weird. It probably would have been arse anyway, so let's move on to a better game that's more interesting and gives me both good and bad memories. Red Faction Guerrilla. I've already done a video on this one, and, well, let's just say it's not some of my best work. But I'm gonna go for normal, because that's what I isn't. But from that video, I can tell you that I really enjoyed this game, and here's past me to prove it.
If you haven't played this game, go and play it, because it's fucking brilliant.
The reason I adore Red Faction Guerrilla is because it adapted from the previous FPS gameplay and transformed itself into a third-person sandbox shooter, which arguably is what the series should have been in the first place. You can't make the most of a destructive engine in a limited space. Yes, it can be scripted, like we've seen, but spontaneous destruction will always topple over scripted action. And that's pretty much what they did for the 2009 installment. It took them 8 fucking years, but they finally did it. Volition turned the Red Faction series into an open world game and allowed for structures, bridges, and bases to be destroyed in any way you wanted. Moreover, with the addition of a brand new geo-mod 2.0 update, you're gonna see some serious shit. Set 46 years after Red Faction 2, Red Faction Guerrilla begins in 2126. You follow the protagonist Alec Mason, a mining engineer who has moved to Mars to reunite with his brother and start a new life on the Red Planet. Story and setting are fairly similar to the previous games, as you would expect. Earth's natural resources have run scarce, and as a result, the world economy has collapsed completely. Under pressure by Earth's corporations and leaders to acquire the resources of Mars, the EDF, who return as the antagonistic force from Red Faction 2, has forced Martian society into a permanent state state of unfree labour. After the murder of his brother Dan by EDF air support, Alec joins the newly reformed Red Faction to revolt and drive them off the planet. I'm starting to see loads of patterns within the plot of this series, but at least they change it for the final installment, right? Right? Once again, the plot is nothing special and holds a reasonably weak story overall. The accompanying voice acting isn't exactly stellar.
Drop the weapon, now!
You guys afraid of a hammer?
Drop it, smartass!
And in general, wasn't really remembered for the plot as a whole. However, where the game came into its own was the gameplay and the implementation of the geo-mod engine. While in the previous games the terrain was a destructible part of the world where you could blow up walls and such, Guerrilla swapped this idea around and focused on the demolition of structures rather than the world. Some may have considered this a detriment to the game, but in actuality it put focus on what could be destroyed and made it all the more satisfying and gave an infinite more amount of freedom to the player. Finally, a Red Faction game when you can destroy stuff properly and it affects the world around you. Took your bloody time, right? The use of explosives and guns is back, once again with an obscene number of weapons to choose from. However, with these came their effects in conjunction with the engine, so triggered explosives could be used to blow up the supports of a bridge, or a rocket launcher could take out a multi-story building. Each weapon did something different and allowed for more spontaneous destruction. You can earn more weapons by collecting scrap and salvage from the structures you destroy, as well as small collectibles like ore veins and other things. The more salvage you earn, the more you can upgrade the weapons you already have and helps in purchasing more, so the destruction of the world actually supports the gameplay. And I love it. With all these, however, comes Alec's signature weapon, the sledgehammer, one of the most entertaining weapons in all of gaming, let alone Red Faction itself. This could cut through pretty much any of the surfaces that could be cut through, and is ridiculously satisfying to mess around with. As I said in the previous video on the subject, which I really want to stop fucking mentioning, you basically play as Thor, which I can't really complain about, because, you know, you're playing as fucking Thor. Whack yourself a Chris Hemsworth face on Alec, and you got yourself a sexy, yummy protagonist. Speaking of Thor, one weapon involves shooting lightning, which is pretty awesome, but the plot actually somewhat revolves around a specific weapon further into the game, where you plan to create what's known as a nano rifle. It's basically a gun that shoots out little things called nanites that can disintegrate any object it comes into contact with, which in turn results in even more open world delinquency. There's some deep plot points with the thing called the nano forge that is utilized to create it, but frankly, I don't give a shit. The gameplay is truly what sells this installment. Like, the amount of fun you can have just destroying random shit and going around is insane. It shows off the engine more than any other games in the series, and that includes the next one. Oh, fuck me, does that include the next one. The map you're digging about in is separated into 7 different sections, and you progress through each one alongside the story. These being Parker, Dust, Oasis, Eos, the Badlands. Ooh, how bad. The Free Fire Zone, and Mount Vogel. Each one holds a specific section of Mars's power through industrialization, with examples such as Dust being the center of the mining economy, whereas Oasis holds the majority of the terraforming efforts to make Mars more habitable. They all have history and a reason for existing, which ironically makes Mars feel more alive than most open worlds. Quite literally with the world in this case. All the sections also contain major settlements that you can blow up and destroy in order to bring down the EDF, so destruction is a key element within this installment, which seems fitting considering it took them 2 engines and 8 fucking years to figure it out. The freedom you have to do so makes it more memorable than any other installment. Do you want to take out every individual support in a building and see it crumble? Go ahead. Do you want to bomb the shit out of it and see bits fly away from each other? Be our guest. You can even use people's vehicles to cause damage to settlements. All the roads in every settlement hold both civilian and EDF cars, tanks, trucks, you name it. They can be used for just getting around the map like any standard open world game. However, each of these can be used for your own destructive needs as well. Want to ram a civilian car into someone's house? You can do that. Want to take a truck straight through an EDF base? You can do that. Want to drive perfectly normally without causing any damage whatsoever? Okay, but why? As you can tell, the degree in which you can destroy environments is pretty insane, and it makes Red Faction Guerrilla an easy sell. It's got everything you'd want from a Red Faction game, finally. And that's not even to mention the improvements on the multiplayer, which, yes, they did that too. The multiplayer is somewhat affected by the story as well, as the more experience you earn, the more bonuses and stages you earn, as well as additional gameplay modes. As well as the classic deathmatch and capture the flag, you have several other modes, such as Siege, where one team tries to destroy buildings controlled by the other team as fast as possible, and whoever manages to destroy all targets the fastest wins the round. These modes are perfectly accompanied by the geo-mod engine, as in each game, you're given extra powers such as being able to run faster, fly, burst through walls, each affecting the game in different ways. Plus, there's a new mode called Wrecking Crew, which is basically where you keep swapping the controller around between people and you destroy as much stuff as possible. Now that's offline at its finest. Putting all of this together makes an incredible yet very underrated game that came out in 2009, and it's fucking 75p in CEX, so you have no excuse. So with an incredible game finally under Volition's belt, there's no way they could possibly fuck up this, right? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the fuck up. Red Faction Armageddon was not only an uninteresting game that turned the incredible open world of Red Faction Guerrilla into just another generic third-person shooter, it also led to a loss of $38.4 million for THQ. Because no one fucking bought it. After a loss that big, it's no wonder why they stopped making games for the series, but it's their fault for thinking that no sandbox was a better choice. They took a successful transition from first-person shooter to a third-person sandbox, and it evidently improved the game, and then went from this open-ended style and returned to a strict linear, closed-off style. Granted, it stayed third-person, but all it changed was the angle of the camera. It didn't exactly improve on the mess that was its plot. Speaking of, the plot does take a slight tangent from the others, but frankly, do we give a shit? I mean, some people liked it, but if I was to describe it in one word, I'd call it plain. Well, I say plain, but there are some bits with merit, so I'll go over them first. The magnet gun is very fun, and the destruction's alright. There, I'm done. Now onto the shit! Set 50 years after the events of Red Faction Guerrilla in 2175, you follow Darius Mason, the grandson of the previous protagonist Alec, who runs several businesses in an underground colonist spot known as Bastion. He runs things such as mining, scavenging, and mercenary work in there since Mars's surface has been ruined over time by terraforming efforts that cause huge storms to engulf the surface. Darius is a moron and opens some crypt thing in an old temple run by the Marauders, the dwellers of Mars, and awakens these weird creatures and causes an Armageddon. Video game writers, ladies and gents, who says it's a dying art? Hand your CV in now for a free dictionary and a pen. So now everyone hates Darius for, frankly, a pretty good reason, and so he joins the Red Faction to clear his name and save Mars, as Alec did in the previous game. Except this time, he does most of it underground in complex tunnel systems, making it instantly less interesting. The beauty of Red Faction Guerrilla was the exploration of the surface of Mars and the destruction that could be caused, whereas here, they've instantly restricted the possible use for the weapons and vehicles like cars and such. Sure, you get other fun things like mech suits and stuff, but then again, it's just restricted by the caves. There's no cathartic release when you have no choice in the destruction. And I found that out the hard way. It's quite ironic how this is the only one that's damaged. Just a little bit. Speaking of irony, it's weird how Red Faction Armageddon had improved on the geo-mod engine to the 2.5 version, yet it rarely has any moments that shows off the improvements. If anything, when I played it, it was barely noticeable. Some of the moments of linear destruction are honestly not that bad, and in general, the engine is still very impressive, but there's so little substance to when it's utilized that it becomes more of a novelty than a core part of the gameplay like Guerrilla made it. Everything just lacks compared to its predecessor, and to call it an improvement would be very, well, wrong. I get that a lot of people are more into third-person shooters than I may be. You all know I love my sandboxes, and I appreciate that it could be catered to a certain demographic. But to take an engine like the geo-mod engine and transition from its incredible appearance in a sandbox where it feels more at home to a linear shooter, I don't know. It just feels wasted to me. It's a fine enough shooter, but it does nothing to stand out, and its prime selling point of destructible environments just seemed kind of unnecessary for a linear shooter. I think overall, Red Faction Armageddon still presented Volition's incredible engine and its talent in gameplay, which I can't argue is evidently in all of its games in the series, but they failed to shape it into an experience that people wanted, and merely relied on an engine they had to carry it. The game couldn't keep itself standing on trivial destruction alone, and with its flimsy, yawn-inducing plot to go with it, it's no wonder no one bought it. This series has always been a mystery to me, and arguably with its best game in the series coming out nearly a decade ago, I thought I should look into the series and what happened to it. And we got our answer. It was Armageddon all along. I do recommend looking into the series as a whole. You know, the geo-mod engine is genuinely something to admire, and the destruction effects of it is insane. And just the evolution that the series went through is one of the starkest in all of gaming. However, the fact that it can go from an FPS to a third-person shooter in the space of a couple of years just shows that it was never going to stick around. It had nothing to settle on, and as a result, it just stopped. Whether that's a good idea or not, I guess that's for the players to decide. It is weird though how it just stopped. Like, there was no other attempt at another game, it just sort of stopped. It was so weird.